My fusion system, fusing 1,000 chickens at the start. Chapter 371, Rebuilding the Severed Fingers Gang. Some time later, Watson returned to Count Grey's manor in the capital. There were tens of thousands of people waiting outside the manor, all scratching their ears and cheeks. The air was filled with an uneasy mood. Count Grey stood at the front of those people. When he saw Watson return, he immediately went forward and knelt respectfully on one knee. "Master, I have completed your orders. I have gathered all the Severed Fingers members in the capital." "Very good, well done. Master, you flatter me. I could not have done it without your help. If it weren't for the fact that you made Snick and Marcus into your subordinates, I would not have had the right to transfer their men here." Count Grey continued to speak respectfully. Not far behind him, two men were half kneeling on the ground in the same position, expressing their respect to Watson. One of the men was Snick, whom Watson had captured in the black market. His narrow eyes were filled with the viciousness of a python. The other man was a burly and fully armored warrior with a simple smile on his face. That warrior was Marcus. He was the City Defense Department's deputy director. He was also a viscount. Even though his title was not high, the City Defense Department was the lifeblood of the entire royal city. The 9 high walls outside the city, the exchange of the Imperial Guards, and the soldiers' daily necessities were all included in the responsibilities of the City Defense Department. Marcus also had a good relationship with the military general, Hone. The identities of the Severed Fingers Gang's leaders were not given at random. Those with missing fingers on the same side of the hand could do the same thing. For example, Elvin and Snick had the same industry, slavery and prostitution, but one was in the floating city, and the other was in the capital. It was apparent that Snick had earned more from the same job. Those missing a finger on their right hand could do the same job as Marcus, also known as right thumb. His job involved the army. For a kingdom, there was nothing that burned more money than the army. An army of 100,000 people could consume millions of gold coins in a month without a war. If there were a war, the consumption would be several times more. It was undoubtedly more convenient to steal a little of that enormous sum of money and put it into his own pocket than to do any other work to earn money. The purpose of gathering everyone here today is very simple. That is, I intend to re-establish the Severed Fingers Gang and establish a new doctrine for this organization. Watson's goal was to become the king of that kingdom and bring peace to it. Outsiders would never be able to harm his family and friends. If he wanted to achieve that goal, he had to start from a small angle. After all, he was not powerful enough to contend with the entire kingdom. Changing the dark side of the kingdom and firmly holding it in his hands was the first step he had to take. Even though the Severed Fingers Gang was an underground force, they had a network all over the kingdom and were under his control. At the very least, he could know what was happening in the whole kingdom. In terms of information acquisition, he was not inferior to King Landar III. Who is that kid? He looks only 12 or 13 years old, but he dares to boast that he wants to fix the Severed Fingers Gang. Is he drunk? SHHH. I only know that kid's name is Watson. Although I don't know his specific identity, he must be extraordinary, seeing that the 3 bosses are so respectful toward him. We'd better be more respectful. Among the tens of thousands of Severed Fingers members there, only Donder and a few dozen people from the Three-Legged Cat Tavern knew what Watson had done. The rest of his subordinates were still confused. I wonder if that new boss has any instructions for the future Severed Fingers Gang, someone asked boldly. I want the Severed Fingers Gang to give up any improper industries. Furthermore, all those who have committed crimes such as murder, rape, and robbery will not be allowed to participate in our core work. They will never be one of our upper echelons. What did you say? Are you joking? Watson's words caused an uproar in the group. They were a group of hooligans, and because they had joined the Severed Fingers Gang, no one dared to provoke them, which made them even worse. They were a group of evildoers. Almost half of them had committed crimes, so they would have to be eliminated. When Watson spoke, the three Severed Fingers gang leaders did not say anything else. It was apparent that they had tacitly agreed to that matter. However, Watson's words shook the group. Some of the members could not accept it. I'm not joking. This is the new policy for the Severed Fingers gang. If anyone is dissatisfied, just withdraw now. I won't stop you. But I will use magic to erase what happened here from your memories to prevent leaks. Does anyone want to leave? Everyone looked at each other. No one moved. At that moment, a person with a cane walked out of the crowd. After looking around, he seemed to swallow his saliva nervously as he questioned loudly, even though I don't know your identity, I trust you. So, I want to ask you. The tavern I run mainly relies on low-quality wine to make money. If you don't let us do such illegal things, then the daily profits of the tavern won't be enough for me and my subordinates to eat. Do you plan to starve us to death? Also, even if I don't do those things, other people in the capital will do similar things. That person's words caused many people there to nod in agreement. On the one hand, Watson did not allow people who had committed serious crimes to become leaders, which made them feel somewhat resentful. On the other hand, they were angry that Watson had banned illegal businesses, then more than half of them would starve to death. That makes sense. What's your name? Sir, my name is Donder. Donder, I can answer your question right now. Watson clapped his hands. Count Grey, who had been kneeling on the ground, immediately stood up and entered the manor. Not long after that, he walked out, followed by a few attendants. There was a massive box of wine in their hands. This wine is from the Raphael Manor. It varies from 1 to 2 years old. It's worth between 1 gold coin and several gold coins. It's not that costly. Watson casually took a few bottles. He pointed at the label on them and said, "Is there anyone who wants to come up here and see if the wine is 1 to 2 years old?" Watson repeated his questions a few times until 2 members volunteered to come up to him. Let's give it a try. The 2 members opened the bottle in front of everyone. They drank 2 mouthfuls of red wine and slowly tasted it before nodding. That's right. This is 1 to 2 years old, indeed. To be precise, it's 1.5 years old. I can tell because I'm in charge of the wine trade. The tens of thousands of Severed Fingers gang members below the stage looked at Watson and the people tasting the red wine with blank expressions. It was apparent that they did not know Watson's intention. In the past, the Severed Fingers gang's method was to mix the red wine with wine from different vintages of other wineries to cover the inferior quality. Then, they would sell it at the same price to earn a huge profit. But now, we have a better choice. Watson spoke with a relaxed expression. He turned around and pointed at the red wine in the hands of the 2 members who had just drunk it. System fusion, activate. The red wine bottles in the hands of the 2 members instantly turned into rays of light and collided with each other under their astonished gazes. A brand new bottle of red wine appeared, and the wine in it rippled with a crystal clear ruby color. A rich wine fragrance wafted from the bottle opening. The 2 of them could not help but swallow their saliva. Their instincts told them that the red wine in the bottle was different. Now, have a taste of this vintage bottle of red wine. Gulp, gulp, gulp. The member holding the bottle suddenly took a mouthful, and his eyes widened. The red wine has changed to about 15 years old. A bottle of 15-year-old red wine on the market can be sold for 700 to 800 gold coins a bottle. But, from 1 to 2 years old to 15 years old, how did that happen? The man seemed to be in disbelief as he muttered to himself. He took a few more sips and drank more than half of the red wine in the bottle. The member beside him rushed up to him and snatched the bottle from his hand. Enough, don't drink any more. Save some for me. After snatching the bottle, another member took a sip and revealed a similarly surprised expression. It's true. This is really a 15-year-old bottle of wine. All right, you've already tasted it. Now it's my turn. No, you've just drunk so many mouthfuls. I haven't had a single sip yet. I want to drink a few more mouthfuls so that it's only fair. The two members snatched the bottle of red wine beside Watson, causing the rest to swallow their saliva. They wondered if the wine had really changed from a year to 15 years old. Did those two people put up an act? Watson waved his hand and used magic to send the bottles of red wine toward the rest of the men. If you don't believe me, you can taste these bottles of red wine. The members reached out to catch the bottles and opened them to taste the wine. They frowned. Isn't that just a year's worth of red wine? As expected, those two people are actors, right? At that moment, Watson reached out to activate the fusion system. The wine bottles in everyone's hands fused, and a wave of exclamations followed. That's not right. The wine has changed. It's now around 15 years old. Its age has increased tenfold. The year had increased tenfold, and the price had increased hundreds of times. Everyone who drank the wine looked shocked. They did not know how Watson had done it. Just as I said, in the past, you have always used a substitute for the wine, and you have wasted a lot of time researching for a better plan. There is also a risk of being caught. But now, I can use magic to turn two inferior wine bottles into a good wine bottle. Furthermore, it does not consume any time at all. Whether it is a bottle or 100 bottles, the time it takes to purify it is the same. Do you still think that I made a wrong decision to let the Severed Fingers gang give up the other grey industry? The men fell silent. They had just refuted Watson because they thought that the grey industry was more profitable, but it seemed like Watson's plan was better. Watson could turn any inferior wine into high-quality wine. They would eliminate the blending process. They had countless taverns under the Severed Fingers gang's name. If the cheap wine in those taverns were turned into high-end wine by magic, no one dared to imagine how much money they would earn by then. Furthermore, they would no longer have to spend money purchasing high-end wine to drink in the future because they could produce such wine themselves. Chapter 372, We are willing to follow young Master Watson. Not only wine but also weapons. Watson waved his hand again. It was Right Thumb Marcus's turn to stand up and go to the mansion to fetch a large pile of weapons. Those weapons were sparkling with silver light and seemed to be made from silver-tier materials. Master, as the Right Thumb, my main responsibility is to extract a portion of the soldiers' weapons and sell them outside. Most of the weapons have been replaced by imitations. They look like silver-tier weapons, but a slight collision could break them. Marcus took two weapons from the pile and smashed them together. One of the two silver-tier weapons instantly broke, while the other had a clear gap on it. As the City Defense Department's deputy director, Marcus was a gold-tier elite. After Watson had fused him into a servant, his strength had increased to platinum tier, so breaking two silver-tier weapons was a piece of cake for him. Watson looked a little sad when he saw that scene. Marcus, who mentioned the switched weapons, had a smile on his face. If someone did not understand the situation, they might be confused by his smile and think that Marcus was a good person. That would be a big mistake. Those fake weapons could cause soldiers to die tragically during the war. Without the soldiers' protection, the kingdom would be in danger. Watson, who valued his companions, thought that was an unforgivable crime, but those gang members did not care. They only cared about their own interests. Watson rarely fused humans. However, after learning about the information from the gang's higher UPS, he was furious when he heard about their evil deeds. Putting aside the harm that Marcus' actions would do to the kingdom, Snick, who was in charge of the slavery and prostitution trades, was in charge of the entire kingdom's industry chain. Even so, the number of young girls who died at his hands was thousands of times more than the number of girls who Casey mutilated. Even Gray, who sold fake alcohol, was not considered clean. The alcohol that Gray mixed could easily cause problems for people's bodies. Many bought high-priced alcohol to give to their friends, but they ended up drinking it with their friends. When those people came to Gray to reason with him, they were beaten up by the gang members until they became permanently disabled. Some were killed and thrown out to the magical beasts. Watson would not tolerate those who committed such evil deeds. He did not integrate all of them because he did not have enough manpower and needed the Severed Fingers gang members to help him. He had just asked Donder to answer his questions, which he had also prepared beforehand. It was to prevent those people from leaving. Then, Watson extended his right hand toward the weapons that Marcus had brought over. System fusion, activate. The two weapons collided, turning from silver tier into gold tier weapons. Congratulations on a successful fusion, Master. You have obtained gold tier weapons. The system notification sound rang in his ears. Watson said, just like the wine, I can also upgrade the quality of these weapons. That way, you don't need to switch them. There is no risk of being discovered and beheaded by His Majesty, and you can also earn high profits selling these weapons through the proper channels. He raised a gold tier long sword in his hand and casually hacked the ground. The sharp sword aura left a deep ditch. Then, he picked up a gold tier long sword and chopped one against the other. The weapons were not damaged at all. Instead, the sand and stones on the ground were crushed, creating a big pit. Everyone stared at the glittering gold tier weapons in front of Watson with greedy eyes. In just a moment, Watson had turned the inferior silver tier longsword into a high-quality gold tier weapon. Its value had increased by at least dozens of times. Such a quality weapon was rare even in the Severed Fingers gang. If they were surprised by Watson's ability to fuse wine and weapons, they were even more tempted by it. Since Watson could fuse wine and weapons, could he also fuse other things, such as slaves? Master, you have just demonstrated the magic of fusing wine and weapons. Can you show us the fusion of slaves? Can you also turn slaves into higher quality ones? The biggest drawback of the slave trade was its wear and tear. Some slaves got sick due to the long journey, while others were towed to their death by the guards while they were going to the capital. However, it would be different if Watson could fuse slaves. Who could refuse an obedient slave who was healthy, beautiful, and had the strength of silver or even gold tier elite? They had to ask about that, especially those from the slavery trade. However, after he asked that question, Donder and the other people from the Three-Legged Cat Tavern looked uncomfortable. They knew very well that Watson could fuse slaves, he could even fuse gold tier elites. The three leaders were prime examples of that, but they could not tell anyone about that. I'm sorry, I will not do something like fusing slaves. In the future, there will be no more slave trading in my Severed Fingers gang. Instead, I want you to help me search for information. Use your men in the sex industry to search for information for me from all over the country. If you do well, the price I pay will not be lower than the price of trading slaves. Watson put his hands behind his back and paced around the people in the manner. All right, that's enough. I have shown you all that I should. Now, you have to give me an answer. Stay or leave. Of course, I will prepare a small gift for those who choose to stay. Everyone hesitated when they heard that. If it were an hour ago, they might have left. However, after seeing Watson's fusion technique that was comparable to a miracle, they were uncertain. In addition, the small gift also made them very curious. I wonder what gift you would give us, young Master Watson. When no one else spoke, Donder took the initiative to jump out and cooperate with Watson. The gift I'm going to give you is quite special. In the past, there was a commandment for all Severed Fingers gang members. Those who join must sever one of their fingers to show their determination. Since the Severed Fingers gang has to turn for the better, that commandment is now abolished. Therefore, I will make up for the pain you've suffered in the past. As Watson spoke, he extended his right hand to Donder and said, Absolute cure. Donder's body suddenly burst with a green light. As a member of the Severed Fingers gang, Donder had lost the ring finger on his left hand, and his right leg was also a metal foot. That was a disability from his early years. However, his fingers, including his right leg, squirmed and grew rapidly under Watson's actions. In just a few seconds, Donder's metal leg fell to the ground and was replaced by a new limb. Donder, do you like this gift? Donder looked down at his leg and then at his finger. Suddenly, tears fell from his eyes as he knelt in Watson's direction. Young Master Watson, thank you for curing my disability. I really like that gift. He had cooperated with Watson because of fear before that. Then, he had changed his mind. He wanted Watson to be his boss. He has cured Donder's disability. That magic is amazing. Does that mean we'd get our fingers back? Those with severed fingers saw Donder's expression, and their eyes flashed. They had gained others' respect when they joined the Severed Fingers gang. If there was anything they were not satisfied with, it was probably the finger they lost. After all, the loss still affected their lives. Regular healing magic could only stop the bleeding, it could not allow the severed limb to grow back. So, they never thought that they could do that at all. However, Watson had a way to let them regain their lost limbs. Now, I'll ask again. Does anyone wish to leave? Watson asked in a clear voice. No, we're willing to follow you, young Master Watson. All the Severed Fingers gang members knelt on the ground and pledged their loyalty to Watson. Their eyes burned with passion. Chapter 373, The Black Emperor. From now on, I am the Severed Fingers gang's new leader. Marcus, after this meeting, I'll have to trouble you to get all the Severed Fingers gang higher UPS scattered throughout the kingdom. Watson stood in the middle of Count Grey's manor. The burly and honest Marcus nodded respectfully and knelt on one knee with the other two high-ranking Severed Fingers gang members. I have another task for you. Later, I will send you a batch of high-quality peak gold tier weapons and armor. Please bring those weapons and armor to the city defense department and sell them. I will give you 3 days. If you can sell the items within 3 days, I will give you a new batch of weapons of higher quality. Yes, Master. Count Grey, bring me all the wine in your hands later. I'll help you fuse them. It's the same, also for 3 days. I want you to sell all the drinks that I've fused. Since the other higher UPS haven't returned yet, I won't start the internal competition for the time being. When everyone returns, I'll issue a new policy. The one with the top monthly profits will receive generous rewards. That benefit will be deducted from the one with the lowest amount, who will also be subject to additional penalties. When Watson was in Black Moon Castle, he formulated many plans to manage the Black Moon Knights. He only managed soldiers who obeyed strict orders to become vicious criminals. There was not much of a difference. Don't worry, Master. I will fulfill your request. Just like Marcus, Count Grey replied respectfully to Watson's orders. In addition, we need to prune and reappoint some of the Severed Fingers members on the agenda. Any Severed Fingers gang members who have committed major crimes are not allowed to be a leader in the organization. I believe that you are more familiar with what each of you has done. I hope that you will not hide it. If anyone dares to hide their crimes, they will be severely punished. Those who shield them will also be punished. On the contrary, I will reward those who take the initiative to expose the crimes of others. Do you understand? Watson looked at the tens of thousands of people in front of him. None of them showed any sign of disrespect. Instead, they looked at each other, and their eyes were shining. As long as they reported the others' crimes, they would be rewarded. Most of them were ruthless and selfish. Watson had also shown miraculous abilities that made them determined to carry out his orders. Perhaps Watson would be so happy that he would give them a bottle of fused wine or a weapon. We understand. I can't hear you. We understand, young Master Watson. Tens of thousands of people shouted in unison, causing the entire manor to shake. However, the voices did not reach the outside of the estate. Furthermore, that manor was Grey's secret location, and it was protected by soundproofing magic. Watson had also added another layer of the same type of magic. Even if a platinum tier elite were there, they would not be able to eavesdrop on the conversation in the manner. He nodded in satisfaction. Watson said, "Excellent. From now on, the Severed Fingers gang will take on a new path. I look forward to your performance. Before I leave, I'll remind you of one last thing. I'm a low-key person. I don't want the news of me leading the Severed Fingers gang to be known by outsiders. Therefore, it's best to pretend that you don't know me when you see me outside. When you mention me, don't call me by my real name. Then what should we call you?" Someone pretended to be brave and asked that question. "Call me the Black Emperor," Watson said after a few seconds of silence. Even though his tone was calm, his words seemed to contain an invisible pressure that made it difficult for everyone present to breathe. If King Landar III were the Holy Dragon Kingdom's ruler, Watson would rule over the underground forces. One was in the open, and the other was in the dark. That might expose the ambitions in their heart. Then, Watson slowly left the manor under everyone's revered gazes. The moment he walked out of the manor, his lips moved as he said, "Absolute cure." A rich aura of life filled Count Grey's manor with voices of gratitudes. "My finger is repaired. Thank you, Watson. No, Black Emperor, for healing my disability." That day was destined to be a memorable day for the Severed Fingers gang, and it was also the same for the entire Holy Dragon Kingdom. After Watson left, he had Donder bring him to the Three-Legged Cat Tavern. He was prepared to fuse all the alcohol in the tavern. Then, he wanted to go to the City Defense Department and fuse all the fake and inferior weapons made by Marcus. At the same time, he began to implement his plans. First, he replaced most of the Severed Fingers gang members. Some of the gang's higher UPS relied on their illegal activities to rise to power. However, their crimes were being reported, one after another. Some were reported for murder, and some for adultery. Many of them were not convinced by those accusations and the order of dismissal. They wanted to lead their subordinates to start a riot. Finally, they found out that the person who reported them was one of their subordinates. Naturally, there was no way to talk about a riot. In just a few hours, the Severed Fingers gang had undergone a significant change in leadership. Members with lesser crimes were chosen to lead the gang. Some received rewards for the meritorious reports. The rewards were more abundant than they had imagined. It was a set of gold-tier weapons and armor, plus a bottle of red wine that could raise one's strength to gold tier. A person's strength could directly raise one's level to gold tier. The members of the Severed Fingers gang had never seen such a potion before, let alone a red wine that had the same effect. The red wine that Watson had fused was hundreds of years old. The members said that one would be promoted to gold tier when one drank the wine. About 100 of the higher UPS had already been promoted from bronze and silver to gold tier. Some went mad because they had not believed Watson's words or worried about retaliation if they were to make a report. As the Severed Fingers gang went through major transformations, a large number of high-quality red wines and weapons poured into the black market. The quality of those red wines and weapons was completely different from before. Many noblemen and adventurers who liked to shop in the black market clicked their tongues in wonder. When those people heard that the weapons and red wines came from the Severed Fingers gang, they were even more surprised. Everyone in the capital knew that the Severed Fingers gang obtained their items through illegal means. They were sold at a high price and of poor quality. How did that change? The new Severed Fingers gang was causing a storm in the capital. Watson, the initiator, yawned and rode his unicorn back to the palace. The king's banquet should be over by now. I should go pick up Master and Nightingale. Watson had helped the Severed Fingers gang's taverns and the Ministry of City Defense to fuse a large number of weapons and red wine. Some of those items were stored in the warehouse for their internal use. Most of them were taken by Count Grey and Marcus for sale. All the Severed Fingers gang's higher UPS had different sales methods. Count Grey chose to visit his noble friends' houses to promote red wine. Marcus was much more straightforward and directly put the weapons on the black market. Due to the high quality, he knew that many people would want to buy them. Watson was not very concerned about those things. As the gang's new leader, all he had to do was point his subordinates in the right direction. His subordinates would do the rest. He also did not let Snick, the gang's remaining original higher UPS, stay idle either. He had arranged for the man to investigate the king's daily life. Snick furrowed his brows when he heard the order, even though the system had fused him into an obedient servant. It seems that the people in the capital glorify the king. Even those lawless people are afraid of him. I wonder if the king has done anything to my master and the others after I left. While he was thinking, Watson had unknowingly returned to the vicinity of the palace. "Young Master Watson, we are here." Upon arriving at the palace, Watson heard a familiar shout. He looked up and found Nightingale standing in front of the palace gate, waving at him. Behind her were Antonio and Anise. There were a few sparse carriages around them. A few noblemen were chatting with Antonio. Apparently, the banquet had been over for some time. If it were not for the sake of getting close to Antonio, no one would be in front of the palace gate. "Brat, I've been looking for you for a long time. Where have you been?" Antonio also saw Watson. He nodded to the noblemen who were talking to him and said, "Sorry, please excuse me for a moment. I need to talk to my disciple." Then he quickly walked to Watson and narrowed his eyes at him. "You didn't go out to cause trouble, did you?" "Of course not, master. Am I that kind of person?" Watson laughed guiltily. He had just taken control of the biggest underground force in the royal city. He did not know if that was considered as causing trouble. Antonio curled his lips when he heard that. "You think I don't know you? Even if you don't find trouble, trouble will always find you. This is the royal city and not the border. If you cause any trouble here, even I can't help you." "I understand, master. Let's not talk about that. After you left the banquet, I heard that you went to the Royal Academy and even got a perfect score. I am here to congratulate you on joining the Royal Academy. Later, I will take you to a place." "Where is that?" "To the Sword Saint's mansion, of course. That is also our main purpose for coming to the capital." Antonio turned to look at a corner and revealed a meaningful smile. "Looks like you didn't sign up for the Royal Academy's mage department. Instead, you went with the warrior department. Since you want to learn about warriors, I'll just have to help you." Chapter 374, I'm only asking for directions. At the Sword Saint family's courtyard in the royal city. The Sword Saints have had a long history. Over the generations, they have had many outstanding talents, especially Frederick. He was known as the strongest person and with the highest military power in the kingdom. His family was not originally from the royal city but from the northern part of the kingdom. Standing in front of the mansion's gate, Christina looked at the crisscrossed sculptures in the shape of two divine swords and the fiery red skin on the entrance wall. She looked bewildered. "I haven't been home for several years. That place actually feels a bit strange to me," she muttered to herself as she stood in front of the gate. At that moment, she heard a few young people's happy discussions coming from the entrance. "Eldest senior brother, it's really worth it to attend the banquet that His Majesty had prepared for Master Antonio today. I didn't have high expectations for the banquet before I went. After all, that kind of banquet has always been used to connect with those noblemen. We might as well go and train more. But today is different. That young man, Watson, he is likely Platinum tier, right?" "Platinum tier? I don't think so. It was apparent he did not use his full strength when he fought against the tainted unicorn. I wonder how strong he is when he uses his full strength. How are his skills in fighting techniques compared to mine?" "Eldest senior brother, that young man is Master Antonio's disciple. He must be a mage. And you want to compete with him in fighting techniques? Aren't you bullying him?" The door opened, and a few young men emerged. If Watson were here, he would have been able to recognize them as the people who had appeared at the banquet in the palace. The young men saw Christina and were stunned. "Tina. You are Tina, right?" The leader had long black hair tied with a simple headband. His hands were in his loose robe, and there was a long sword at his waist. He looked excited when he saw Christina. The two young men beside him were also excited. "Miss Christina is back. Master will be thrilled to know about that. Quickly, go and inform Master." "Senior brother Samuel, I'm back." A smile appeared on Christina's tired and beautiful face. "It's good that you're back. You must have suffered while you lived outside for so many years. If Master had not forbidden us from looking for you, I would not have allowed you to be by yourself for all these years." The man named Samuel walked up to Christina. He reached out with his right hand to sweep the dust off Christina's face, but the latter took a step back and dodged it. Samuel's eyes darkened. He withdrew his hand awkwardly and scratched his head. "Tina, you just came back today. You must be exhausted. Go take a bath and rest. I'll inform Master about your return." Splash! Sounds of splashes echoed as she walked into the water. Christina leaned against the side of the bath, letting her wet hair hang over her face. She looked up at the night sky. There was no one else in the tub except for her. As she looked at the stars in the sky, a trace of reminiscence appeared on her face. She remembered when she was in a hot spring somewhere, and there was a talented youth beside her. They also fought in the hot spring. She blushed when she thought of the fight and Watson's naked body. The stars in the sky gradually connected, outlining the appearance of the young man. "I haven't returned home for many years. Many things in the house have changed. Just like this hot spring bath, it did not exist when I left home a few years ago. It's not only my family, but I have also changed a lot as well. It is all because of Watson. According to my senior brothers, Watson seemed to have been in the limelight at His Majesty's banquet. That kind of thing is indeed something he could do." When she thought of Watson, the confusion on Christina's face turned into confidence. "I don't know if he has forgotten me, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, I passed the assessment. In the future, he and I will be classmates in the same academy, and we will also be in the same department. During the assessment, I heard someone in the academy say that Watson applied for the warrior department. He is a mage, but he applied for the warrior department. Why? Did he have someone in the warrior department that he cares about? Is it me?" That thought suddenly appeared in Christina's mind. After all, Watson had come from the border. The only person he knew in the Royal Academy was her. Then, she thought about the fierce battle she had with Watson in the hot springs. The shadow reflected on her face became redder and redder. She could not help but reach out and lightly pat the surface of the water, and a sharp sword aura immediately cut it. Watson must have a reason for wanting to join the warrior department. Maybe he joined the warrior department for me, to fight me. That's so arrogant. Christina's ears twitched as she glanced at the water in front of her shyly. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice. "Master, are you sure it's appropriate for you to go in without the Sword Saint family?" "Don't worry. I come here often. I'm more familiar with this place than my own home. Furthermore, if I inform them that B***** Reed will put on airs and allow his disciples to come out to greet me, he won't let me see him easily. But, to be honest, this place has indeed changed after staying on Mount Creation for a few years. I remember there were no buildings here before. Watson, you go ahead and take a look. I will look elsewhere." Christina thought that one of them sounded like Antonio. However, the voice soon became farther away. It was hard to judge. "What's going on? Are Watson and Master Antonio here?" Christina wrapped the towel around her chest tightly. "Impossible." She quickly dispelled her thoughts. The timing of Watson and Antonio's appearance was too coincidental. Based on Antonio's identity, it was impossible for him to barge into someone else's residence without informing them. Perhaps she only thought that because she missed him so much that she was hallucinating. Christina comforted herself until she saw a familiar face poking out of the edge of the bath. It was some distance away from her, on the surface of the water, and it greeted her. "Oh, Lady Sword Mistress, we meet again. I want to ask where the Sword Saint's room is. My master is too unreliable. He said that he was very familiar with this place, but he got lost the moment we entered." There was a towel wrapped around Christina's body. The wet towel could only cover her chest and other important parts, exposing most of her snow-white skin. Furthermore, the towel was wet and stuck to her body, revealing her exquisite curves. "It's an illusion. All of this is my illusion." Christina closed her eyes. After a long while, she opened her eyes with difficulty. Watson was still standing in front of her with a puzzled look on his face. "Why aren't you talking? Are you shy because you're bathing? You've seen me naked once before, so we'll call it even. And to be honest, I'm not interested in you, so I won't have any ill intentions toward you. You can rest assured." Watson intended to express that he would not think about matters between men and women, especially at his age. However, his words had another meaning in Christina's ears. Christina's lips trembled, and she gritted her teeth as she said, "Watson, you ****, I'm going to kill you. Platinum tier peak fighting technique, infinite sword in one." Swish! The water surface split into two as a long sword condensed from combat aura flew up rapidly. It was as if she wanted to split everything in front of her, including Watson, into two. When Christina released her fighting skill, the sword aura that had always filled the sky fell simultaneously. However, Christina had fused the sword aura into one. It was not as gorgeous as before, but its power was several times stronger. However, that sword attack did not pose a threat to Watson. It was like a piece of glass hitting a steel plate. It shattered into pieces. Watson did not do anything. He withstood that attack with his physical body. That scene caused Christina's anger to simmer slightly. The expression in her eyes was gradually replaced by disbelief. Previously, when she fought with Watson, she could at least feel his power. However, at that time, she did not feel anything. Watson was like a bottomless abyss or a deep sea. No one knew what was hidden under his calm appearance. As she traveled to the royal city from the City of Steel, her strength had increased rapidly. Even if she were not comparable to Watson, at least she would not be too far off. However, it seemed that she had underestimated Watson yet again. "Lady Sword Mistress, it's not appropriate for acquaintances to fight and kill each other when they meet. I'm just asking for directions." The broken sword's energy traveled along Watson's body and landed around the hot spring. It shot holes in the rocky walls and ceiling. The rocks fell with dust. "Tina, why is it so noisy in there? What happened? Are you okay?" The noise attracted the attention of the other members of the Sword Saint family. A man's voice came from outside the bath. "Senior brother Samuel, I'm fine. Don't come in." Christina's expression changed. She quickly took off the towel wrapped around her body. An intense combat aura emerged and turned into a layer of milky white light element armor that wrapped around her body. For some reason, Christina did not feel disgusted when she showed her towel-wrapped body in front of Watson. However, she panicked when she realized that other people might see her body. Fortunately, she managed to wrap herself in combat aura armor as Samuel flew over the pool like a huge rock. Samuel was stunned when he saw Christina wrapped in combat aura armor in the hot spring and Watson standing near her. He did not know why Watson was there. Then, he reacted, and his eyes were burning with anger. A man and a woman were in the hot spring, and one of them was naked. It was needless to say what had happened. "Watson, I saw you at the banquet during the day. You are a mage, but you have mastered a profound sword technique. I admire you very much. I didn't expect Master Antonio's disciple would be such a shameless person, sneaking into other people's houses to peek at girls bathing in the middle of the night. I must teach you a good lesson. You should understand that you can't do things recklessly just because of your identity. Samuel spread the wings on his back furiously. Upon closer inspection, one would realize that those were not wings but sword energy. Amidst the overlapping sword energy, Samuel reached his hand outward and drew a sword. Platinum Tier Fighting Technique, Void Blade. Chapter 375, Fused Peak Platinum Tier Fighting Technique. Kika. Kika. At the same time, as Samuel drew half of the blade, the space behind him shattered. Pitch-black cracks spread in all directions, covering more than half of the sky. At that moment, Samuel drew the entire blade. It was a pure black longsword. Wherever the blade passed, the space became unstable. He charged toward Watson with the longsword. Senior brother Samuel is a platinum tier elite. Even Master praised his wind elemental combat aura. He excels at compressing the wind element and turning it into a sharp blade that can cut through everything. Senior brother Samuel's ultimate skill, the void blade, can even cut through space. Christina muttered to herself when she saw the attack. Then, she looked in Watson's direction worriedly. Even she could not block that attack easily. It was difficult to guarantee that Watson would not be injured by that move. When Samuel attacked Watson, his peripheral vision was locked onto Christina. When he noticed that Christina did not look at him but only at Watson worriedly, he was a little angry. As the most outstanding disciple of the Grand Sword Master, Samuel had lived in that courtyard since he was very young. He and Christina were childhood friends. Their long-term companionship made Samuel develop special feelings for her. However, due to his identity, he had never mentioned it to Christina in person. That time, to prove that she was not weaker than the Grand Sword Master, Christina had run to the City of Steel. The pain of missing her for years made Samuel make up his mind. When Christina came back at that time, he would tell her everything. In the end, he did not expect that he would actually see Christina having a late-night private meeting with Watson. How could he accept that? Subconsciously, Samuel injected more combat aura into the void blade in his hand, causing the void blade to expand instantly. It expanded from a sword that was more than 1 meter long to more than 10 meters long. The blade was covered with a layer of the storm. The ground that was blown away by that layer of the storm was blown away. The hot spring water in the surrounding courtyards and baths was torn into pieces. It flew in the sky and was cut into pieces by the sword aura that came with it. Watson was at the center of the storm. The pressure he felt was even more intense. It was as if two completely different forces appeared on both sides of his body. They were pulling him from left and right at opposite angles, wanting to tear his body into pieces. What a mighty sword! As expected of the Sword Saint's disciple. Feeling the intensity of Samuel's attack, Watson did not panic. Instead, the corner of his mouth rose. He stretched out a finger and pressed it down gently. Absolute gravity. Swish! With a muffled sound, the flying debris fell back to the ground at the same time. Furthermore, under the influence of Watson's rules, the debris fell back the way they were destroyed. Those things fell back to the ground in a seamless manner and returned to their original appearance as if they had never been destroyed before. Is that a time reversal spell? No, that is. Samuel saw that the scenery around him had returned to its original state. He was surprised at first, but then he realized that something was wrong. He wanted to retreat, but it was too late. The gravity that was hundreds of times stronger was applied to his body, causing his knees to go weak. A crack also appeared on the void blade in his hand. Master Watson, it's not what you think. Let's talk it out. A finger pressed down on Samuel as Watson spoke in a friendly manner. Shut up. I have nothing to say to you. Samuel struggled to get up from the ground. His legs trembled continuously as if he was under tremendous pressure. Blood seeped from the corner of his mouth, and the cracks on the void blade in his hand increased. It looked like he was in pain, but Samuel did not stop his actions. "Senior brother Samuel, what happened? Why did you fight with someone? And that young man, is not he the disciple of Master Antonio that we saw at the banquet earlier? Why is he here?" When Samuel got up, two more confused voices echoed from nearby. Two young men who were about the same age as Samuel appeared in the courtyard. They looked back and forth between Samuel and Watson in surprise. "Second junior brother, third junior brother, you came at the right time. That Watson kid snuck into the Sword Saint's courtyard in the middle of the night and peeked at Tina taking a bath. Come with me to catch him." "What? He barged into someone else's house to peek at the bath. That is too much. Furthermore, he peeked at the Sword Saint's daughter. Does he want to die?" The two youths' expressions changed drastically. They did not bother to verify the authenticity of those words. They immediately drew their long swords from their waists and crossed Samuel's body to attack Watson. Platinum tier fighting technique, Sky Domination / Platinum tier fighting technique, Four-sided water tornado. The two youths grasped the battle with fire and water elements, respectively. A huge flaming sword that stretched for hundreds of meters appeared in the sky and burned the clouds, revealing a huge sword tip under the clouds. 4 water tornadoes around that huge flaming sword connected the sky and the earth. They stood to the north, south, east, west, and north of the Sword Saint courtyard. For a moment, the sky above the Sword Saint courtyard was covered with dark clouds. Lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. All kinds of strange phenomena could be clearly seen in the entire capital. What happened? Could it be that someone in the Sword Saint clan is fighting and sparring? Some passers-by outside could not help but guess when they saw the scene in the Sword Saint courtyard. I usually pass by the Sword Saint courtyard and often hear the sound of training coming from inside, but there has never been such a big commotion, said the puzzled companions beside him. It doesn't seem like training, but more like tearing down a home. No matter what they are doing, the members of the Sword Saint clan are a group of experts that ordinary people cannot imagine. We should stay away from them to avoid being affected by them. All the passers-by who were walking on the streets near the Sword Saint courtyard left the streets. Even the shops on both sides of the roads were closed. At that moment, in the Sword Saint courtyard, following the actions of Samuel's 2 junior brothers, the energy factors in the world immediately became tyrannical. Samuel took the opportunity to leave Watson's absolute gravity rule coverage and injected energy into the void blade that was about to shatter. He made it sharp again. At the same time, he took a step back and took a deep breath. That breath was inhaled very deeply, causing the surrounding air to show obvious lines. It was clearly sucked into his mouth. Then, his body seemed to inflate, and his muscles were at least half full. A whistling sound came out of his body. It appeared that what flowed in Samuel's body at that moment was not blood but a strong wind. Platinum tier battle technique, Void Blade Joint Slash. As the sound emitted from his mouth, the void blade in Samuel's hand flashed forward rapidly. Due to its swift speed, other than Watson, no one else present knew what Samuel had done. After Samuel slashed out with his sword, they only saw that the expanded muscles shrunk rapidly, from a full state of being inflated to a shriveled state. It was even more shriveled than before the move was released. At the same time, a huge crack appeared in front of Samuel. The space was like a shattered glass, continuously spreading out smaller cracks around the crack, emitting a terrifying attractive force. The 2 platinum-class battle techniques that junior brother Samuel had unleashed were extremely powerful. However, before they could reach Watson, the 2 attacks were sucked into the space crack by the whale. After absorbing the 2 white gold tier dough techniques, the spatial rift became even larger. Moreover, the flames and the waves within continued to collide, emitting a terrifying explosion sound as they crashed down on Watson. That attack fused 3 platinum tier fighting techniques. Without a doubt, even a peak platinum tier expert might not be able to withstand that attack. That move was a fused peak platinum tier fighting technique. Its name was Shattering the Void. Senior brothers, you actually used a fused fighting technique of that level against Watson? Don't tell me you want to kill him. Christina could not stand it any longer. At the same time, she shouted at Samuel and the others anxiously. Hearing her voice, Samuel, who had just finished unleashing the move, panted heavily. Bean-sized sweat slid down his forehead. His expression was a little complicated. He regretted it the moment he unleashed the move. He only saw Watson easily blocking his attack. He was a little unconvinced and subconsciously used his strongest move. However, he had already unleashed the move. Now, even if he was asked to stop, he would not be able to do it. All he could do was pray that Watson's vitality was a little tenacious and that he would not die under that move. After all, that move was the strongest move that the three of them had unleashed together. The power was not as simple as the sum of 3 platinum-ranked fighting techniques. Instead, it had multiplied. The spatial crack wrapped in water and fire had not reached Watson yet. It had caused the ground hundreds of meters below Watson's feet to sink by half a meter. One could see how powerful that move was. Platinum-ranked fighting technique, Infinite Sword Unity. The sword mistress, Christina, bit her lip as she faced the spatial crack that was attacking the sky. She waved her right hand toward the sky. A giant sword of light that stretched for 100 meters appeared and abruptly split the spatial crack open. However, after the spatial crack in front of her was split open, it instantly turned into 2 cracks that were almost the same size and fell at an even faster speed. It was over. Christina's face was pale. When the 2 attacks were about to land on her and Watson's heads, Watson suddenly took a step forward and came in front of her. He extended his right hand to protect her. He spat out 4 words toward the attack in the sky. Absolute Seal. Swish. The violent attack that was supposed to be able to destroy the entire Sword Saint courtyard immediately compressed into the middle after Watson's voice sounded. With a pop, it disappeared. Fortunately, I have upgraded to the diamond tier. Otherwise, I might not be able to block such a powerful attack. When Watson blocked Samuel's attack, a terrifying aura erupted from his body. That aura distorted the sky and earth, making the space around Watson become illusory, and the lines of rules were faintly discernible. He's a diamond tier elite. Samuel and his 2 junior brothers felt Watson's aura and opened their mouths wide. He had advanced to diamond tier. Christina looked at Watson's not-so-tall body, which was emitting a giant-like radiance. Her heart was in turmoil, and she widened her beautiful eyes. Chapter 376, The Sword Saint's Assessment. Watson stood in front of Christina as if he was standing between heaven and earth. His small body emitted an aura that made people unable to look directly at him. Even a platinum tier elite like Samuel could not help but feel the urge to kneel in front of Watson. He's actually a diamond tier elite. He looks like he's only 12 or 13 years old, but he's already at the diamond tier. What kind of monster did Master Antonio find as his disciple? No wonder Tina has always been indifferent to me, but she's acting so intimate with that youth. I understand the reason now. I really can't compete with him. Samuel expressed his shock at Watson's strength, then he snapped back to his senses and let out a bitter sigh. The 2 junior brothers behind him did not have such rich emotions. They only stared at Watson with his mouth wide open, unable to speak for a long time. If they knew that Watson was a diamond tier elite, they would not dare to make a move no matter what. Watson, you. When did you advance to diamond tier? The first to react was Christina. Her head was a little dizzy, and her body swayed a few times as if she was about to fall to the ground. She was supported by Watson. Watson scratched his head. On the way to the capital, or more accurately, in the floating city, Master Antonio arranged a few trials for me. I advanced to the diamond tier after passing them. He advanced while he was on the way to the capital when he passed some trials. Did they hear what he said? Watson's speed of advancing from platinum to diamond tier was terrifying. Even if Watson had started cultivating from his mother's womb, it had only been 12 or 13 years. He was a 12 or 13-year-old diamond tier elite. It was unprecedented in the kingdom's entire history. I'll say it again. I've offended all of you just now. I did not mean to barge in here. I apologize for my actions. Now, can everyone please listen to me? As soon as Watson's voice fell, no one present refuted him. So what if they did not want to listen to Watson? After all, they were not a match for Watson. Watson, let's forget about what happened just now. Why did you come here? Christina knew that Watson wasn't a lecherous person, so she tried to smooth things over. I came here to see the Sword Saint. I suggested knocking on the door to come in, but Master said that it's more convenient to not enter through the door. Speaking of which, my master just said that he wanted to go somewhere else to take a look and then left. I wonder where he went. Watson turned his head and looked around. At that moment, a magnetic cough came from the sky. Watson, I did not say anything like that. Don't make things up. Antonio descended from the sky and landed beside Watson. He held his cane with one hand and covered his mouth with the other hand as he kept coughing. He used his eyes to signal Watson. Greetings, Master Antonio. When Samuel and the others saw Antonio, they immediately knelt on one knee respectfully. Watson must have spoken the truth. He did not sneak in there to peek at Christina while she took a shower. They had misunderstood Watson. Get up. Antonio waved his hand casually, and a breeze immediately rose on the ground, lifting Samuel and the others up. Then, he turned his head to look at the sky. Reed, such a big incident has happened at your home, and you did not even come out to take a look. Compared to the hot-tempered man you were in the past, you are really calm now. Antonio, as the source of everything, you clearly know that what you did was inappropriate, yet you blame others for not stopping you. After not seeing you for a few months, you are still the same. A light voice that was different from Antonio's rang out. That voice had experienced many changes, and just hearing it made people imagine the image of an old man with white hair. However, the person who appeared in midair did not quite fit that illusion. The man in midair had long yellow hair and a handsome face. Other than the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, there were almost no traces of time on his face. At that moment, the man was wearing a training suit, and his hands that were full of calluses were behind his back. His calm eyes seemed to contain everything, as if there were countless sword auras rising and falling within them. It was the reigning Sword Saint Reed Frederick. Watson looked at the man in the sky, and his eyes sparkled. Previously, in the City of Steel, he had fought with that Sword Saint's projection once to pass the trial of the 100th level of the maze. However, compared to the Sword Saint in front of the projection, he was clearly more mature. His strength was also more unfathomable. Just looking at him made Watson feel that he could not defeat him. That was the first time he had such a feeling toward a person. Antonio, the only change you've changed those days is that you've become younger. You've advanced to diamond tier? I did not expect that you would be able to find a way to break the curse of the spring of life in your lifetime. Also, the youth beside you are also at diamond tier. It's really rare to have such strength at such a young age. Did you bring him here to show off to me that your disciple is more outstanding than mine? Reed's gaze swept over Antonio's body and landed on Watson. Because of the Sword Saint's gaze, Watson immediately felt an even stronger pressure than before. Reed, do you think that I am that kind of person? Show off? Watson is very outstanding, indeed. All of your disciples won't be able to hurt him. You might not be able to understand. It should be said that even if Watson stood still and let your disciples fight for 3 days and 3 nights, Watson will be fine, but your disciples will be exhausted. Antonio raised his head and faced the sky. His words made everyone speechless. Even though he did not say it out loud, everyone could hear the strong sense of showing off in Antonio's words. Even Reed could not help but twitch his lips. Also, Watson not only broke the history of the kingdom in terms of tier but also in terms of ability. Not only is he a mage, but he is also a warrior. He even has the skills of an archer and a priest. Didn't you leave a record of clearing 100 levels in the City of Steel that no one could break in decades? Watson broke that. Not only did he break the record, but he also modified the entire underground maze and... Stop, Antonio. Tell me, what do you want from me? Seeing that Antonio was about to say something for 3 days and 3 nights, Reed quickly reached out to stop him. I came here to look for you because I want you to teach Watson some knowledge about warrior skills. After all, Watson has already reached the peak in magic with my guidance, but he still lacks other aspects. In the future, Watson will become the strongest person in the kingdom, and he will be a full-time expert that we've never had. Reed, I allow you to be Watson's swordsmanship teacher for the sake of our past friendship. You have to make good use of that opportunity to witness a legend and enter the annals of history. Seize the opportunity. Seize your ass. Reed was a little angry when he saw that Antonio was pulling his nose so hard that it was about to go up to the sky. He had fought with Antonio for more than half of his life. Usually, when he was with Antonio, he would always tease him. After all, he was stronger, even though there were fewer disciples, they were more elite. Furthermore, he had a daughter who was nicknamed the Sword Mistress and could bear the family trade. But now, Antonio had found such a monster from God knows where. He had crushed his disciple in all aspects. Antonio had even broken the curse and upgraded to Diamond tier, and now he was showing off in front of him, which made Reed feel a little uncomfortable. While thinking, Reed's eyes fell on Watson. A few flashes of sword aura flashed through his eyes, and he had an idea. Antonio, if you want me to take Watson as my disciple, just say it. There's no need to beat around the bush. However, I have my own rules when it comes to taking in disciples. I won't take in just anyone. If you want to be my disciple, you have to first pass my test. What test? It's very simple. No matter what method you use, as long as you can make me move one step, that young man will be considered to have passed the test. I'll give him 3 chances. Reed's idea was very simple. If Antonio directly agreed to accept him as a disciple, it would be very embarrassing. In addition, he was holding a bit of anger in his heart and decided to take a small revenge. As long as Watson could not make him move within 3 moves, the things that Antonio had bragged about just now would undoubtedly turn into face-smacking evidence. Although the young man in front of him had become a diamond tier at the age of 12 or 13, which indeed made him very tempted and want to accept him as a disciple, Antonio's face made him even more unhappy. Why do I feel that Master has secretly changed the content of the assessment? I remember that when we entered the assessment, the content was that as long as we could withstand a sword aura from Master, we would pass. Behind Samuel, 2 young men whispered with puzzled expressions. Resisting a sword aura and making Reed move were 2 utterly different assessment methods. The former was equivalent to blocking Reed's attack, while the latter was equivalent to confronting Reed head-on. After all, it could make a person move, which meant that the attacker already had the strength to shake that person. However, it was easier said than done to make the strongest person in the kingdom move a step. Looks like Master is deliberately making things difficult for that youth. Samuel's expression was strange. He had followed Reed the earliest and more or less knew about the matters between Antonio and Reed. He could not help but feel sorry for Watson. In his opinion, no matter how strong Watson was, it was impossible for Reed to move because Reed's strength had already surpassed common sense. At the same time, he felt a little lucky. It seemed that Christina's attitude toward Watson was not normal. They would not need to interact that much if Watson was not her father's disciple. While Samuel was thinking about that, Watson had already taken a step forward and came in front of Reed. Your Excellency Sword Saint, you said that as long as I get you to move one step, you would accept me as your disciple. Can I start now? Watson tilted his head and revealed a tender smile unique to that young man. However, I also have a request. 3 opportunities are too many. Just one. I only need one chance. If I can't move you, then I lose. He actually thought that 3 chances were too many. So arrogant. Sword Saint Reed frowned. Sure. Since you have such a request, I'll allow it. Then I'll begin. Please stay away from me for the time being. Watson gestured for Christina and the rest to retreat. When everyone retreated a few hundred meters away and looked at him curiously, Watson's expression suddenly became serious. He extended his right hand and aimed at Samuel in the sky. System fusion, activate. Fuse all rules. Peak Diamond Tier ability, the Kingdom of God. Following Watson's voice, many rules were extracted from the air and appeared in mid-air. At the same time, those chains of laws were forcefully fused. A large amount of light of faith appeared on them as the outline of an illusory kingdom was formed. Reed, who had initially been calm, suddenly had a change in his expression after seeing Watson's move. Chapter 377, The Sword Saint. What move is that? I heard that Diamond Tier experts could control the power of rules. Could that be the power of rules? After Watson released his move, the 2 junior brothers behind Samuel looked at the shadow above their heads and discussed it. No, that's not just the power of rules. It should be something more profound. Samuel shook his head. As the Sword Saint's disciple, he had some understanding of Diamond Tier's elites. The Diamond Tier elites were powerful amongst humans, but the Starlight Tier elites were considered gods. The gods controlled the divine kingdom, and mortals who took one step in it would die. Samuel had not felt anything when he listened to his master's explanation. However, when he saw Watson release the illusory divine kingdom, he suddenly had an inexplicable thought. The kingdom in front of him was the divine kingdom. He did not enter it. Just looking at it from the outside made him feel an urge to worship it. Watson could use the power of the divine kingdom? Is he a Diamond Tier elite? While his whole body was trembling, Samuel's expression became more and more bitter. His self-esteem suffered a setback when he had learned that Watson was a Diamond Tier elite. Then, when he saw Watson use the power of the divine kingdom, he doubted whether Watson's real strength was higher than Diamond, or perhaps he was at the Starlight Tier. If that were really the case, then it would be too terrifying. It had been a long time since a Starlight Tier elite had appeared in that world. It was not difficult for such an existence to fight against an entire country alone. After all, there was a huge difference in strength between a god and a man. Antonio also reached out to stroke his non-existent beard and narrowed his eyes. Kid, you've actually raised your strength to such an extent? You're now using the rules to create a divine kingdom. Even though it is much weaker than the Starlight Tier divine kingdom, it still surpassed the Diamond Tier 1. Even I could not do such a thing. Antonio glanced at the enormous power of faith emanating from Watson's divine kingdom. His eyes were filled with uncontrollable envy. Building a divine kingdom required rules and the power of faith. Antonio was confident that as long as he was given some time, he would be able to develop enough rules too. However, the power of faith was not easy to obtain. Watson was able to build that divine kingdom was mostly due to the pure power of faith. While the people around him sighed, Watson panted as he supported the illusory divine kingdom in the sky. That move was the product of using the system to fuse all the rules into his body. It could temporarily summon the divine kingdom. When he advanced to Diamond Tier in the floating city, he used that move in front of tens of thousands of sea folks. Due to the lack of rules, he had not successfully used it before that. At that time, he had learned from the preceding lesson. He did not choose to condense the entire divine kingdom but decided to use only the rules that he had mastered. So, only about half of the divine kingdom that he had created was real, and the other half was hidden in the void. It was an illusory light shadow, constantly distorting with the fluctuations of space. Strictly speaking, what he was using now was not a real divine kingdom, but a semi-finished divine kingdom. Even so, its power was not something that ordinary people could withstand. The moment that divine kingdom appeared, the entire night sky of the royal city was illuminated. On the streets of the royal city, many passers-by raised their heads to look at the sky. Their eyes reflected psychedelic colors as they knelt on the ground sincerely. There were even people who pushed open the doors and windows and stuck their heads out the windows, watching everything in the sky. They spread their arms and worshipped devoutly. A city that is reflected in the royal city and covers the entire area of the royal city. What kind of magic is that? That's not right, you're seeing things wrong. That city clearly doesn't only cover the area of the royal city, but it also covers the entire country. That must be a miracle from the gods, praising the gods. Everyone thought that the divine kingdom that Watson had cast was very large. As for how large it was, everyone's vision was different. Some people felt that the city in the sky was so large that it could cover the entire Holy Dragon Kingdom. There were also people who felt that the city in the sky was only as big as the royal city. That was the characteristic of the divine kingdom. Because it was the manifestation of the rules were everywhere, so the divine kingdom was everywhere. For as far as the eye could see, it was the divine kingdom. It was the road to the divine kingdom. At the imperial palace, in the royal city, King Landar III wore a bathrobe and held a golden goblet in his hand. He stood in front of the window of the bedroom and looked up at the scenery above him. His expression was uncertain. That is the diamond tier that you mentioned. It seems that Watson has already reached the starlight tier. Your Majesty, don't be nervous. That young man hasn't quite reached the starlight level yet. He just used some methods from the diamond tier to forcefully create the divine kingdom. That realm is incomplete, and its power is not even 1/10 of the real divine kingdom. Balls of shadow squirmed in the cup in King Landar III's hands as if they were alive. A majestic voice came from the shadows. No matter what, the incomplete divine kingdom is still a divine kingdom. To be able to release a divine kingdom at that age, that youth might have the possibility of becoming a god. King Landar III squeezed the cup slightly, causing several cracks to appear on the surface of the cup. With a crisp sound, it shattered, and wine spilled all over the ground. At the same time, he stared at the distant eyes that were filled with killing intent. There was something else in his eyes. At the Sword Saint's courtyard. When Watson released his divine kingdom, Reed had already taken action. He took a step forward, and tens of thousands of sword aura appeared behind him. Those sword aura were very thick and heavy, and they looked like real weapons forged from platinum tier ores. The blade of the sword was engraved with dense, mysterious symbols that kept rotating. Those were the manifestations of rules. It turned out that those sword aura were not real sword aura. Instead, they were rules related to swords. The kingdom of sword and slash. Reed let out a soft cry. The tens of thousands of sword auras behind him immediately gathered and turned into a huge sword-shaped kingdom. The tip of that kingdom's sword pointed toward the sky. The hilt of the sword sat on the ground, and tens of thousands of multicolored rays of light fell from the body of the sword. It was as fast as a waterfall, and the chanting of the gods could be faintly heard from it. After the huge sword kingdom was formed, it smashed toward Watson's illusory kingdom. When the two collided, cracks appeared in Watson's kingdom, and the illusory kingdom became even more unreal. However, it was not destroyed. On the contrary, after Reed's sword kingdom collided with Watson's kingdom, it was raised high up and split the sky into two. Even Reed retreated more than 10 steps. His expression changed, and he took a deep breath before commanding the huge sword kingdom to fall. That time, Watson's divine kingdom could no longer stop it. It was split into two and disappeared without a trace. Your Excellency, the Sword Saint, is indeed powerful. Watson's face was pale, and a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. He could feel that the Sword Saint Reed was the same as him. Both of them were only at Diamond tier, but the other party could actually use the Divine Kingdom. Furthermore, compared to his half-finished product, Reed's divine kingdom was infinitely close to the starlight level. In just 2 moves, his divine kingdom was destroyed. When the kingdom was destroyed, Watson could feel that the power of faith in his body had become much weaker. That made him feel powerless. "Watson, you're the powerful one. Just now, we set the rules. As long as you let me move 1 step, you'll pass. Not only did you let me move, but you also forced me to use my full strength. You've won that competition. From now on, you're my disciple." Nodding at Watson, Reed immediately turned to look at Antonio and complained in his heart. "Antonio, where did you find that monster? If I had not stopped him in time and allowed that kid's kingdom to descend on the capital, then less than 10% of the people in the capital would have survived. You actually watched the show from the side. Aren't you afraid that that kid will destroy the capital?" Previously, when he saw Antonio flaunting Watson in front of him, Reed only felt anger in his heart. However, he felt a lingering fear then. Antonio's description of Watson was not exaggerated. On the contrary, Reed felt that Antonio's praise of Watson was too reserved. After defeating Watson, Reed quickly withdrew the illusory divine kingdom. From his attack to the disappearance of the divine kingdom in the sky, it had only been a few dozen seconds. That caused the residents on the street who were watching the scene above their heads to be in a daze. They rubbed their eyes and suspected that they were dreaming. "Why did the realm above our heads disappear? Was it only a mirage?" a resident muttered softly and stood up from the ground. When he saw the divine kingdom above his head, he did not know why, but he suddenly felt a sense of tranquility in his heart. He wanted to show the highest respect to the divine kingdom, but the feeling disappeared after he stood up. Not far away from him, another resident shook his head. "It shouldn't be." Along with that scene was a loud noise. "I think there might be someone fighting." To cause such a strange phenomenon, it meant that the 2 parties fighting were at least on the same level as Antonio and the Sword Saint. Perhaps Master Antonio and the Sword Saint were sparring. Many of the people in the capital were puzzled. At the same time, a mirage appeared in the sky above the capital. The news that Antonio and the Sword Saint fought soon spread throughout the entire capital at the speed of a storm. According to some insiders, before those 2 divine kingdoms appeared, a large-scale battle had erupted in the Sword Saint's courtyard. That further confirmed the news that a fight had occurred in the Sword Saint's courtyard. Many people who wanted to find out the truth of that matter gathered outside the Sword Saint courtyard, looking forward to it. After waiting for half an hour, some people were impatient as the Sword Saint's courtyard gate opened. Antonio led Watson away from the gate of the courtyard. Standing at the gate, Watson bowed respectfully to Reed and said, "Sir Sword Saint, sorry to disturb you in the middle of the night. Master and I will leave now." As expected, Antonio came to fight with the Sword Saint. It seemed that Antonio and Reed caused a huge scene in the air. Many people in the crowd had such thoughts. At that moment, they saw Reed walk out of the gate with his hands behind his back. He glanced around and then looked at Watson with a profound expression. "Watson, you still call me Sir Sword Saint? Are we still strangers? You've passed the assessment. You should call me Master instead. At your age, you're able to force me to use my full strength. You're the only person who could do that in the entire kingdom. You should be proud of yourself. Sword Saint, I mean, Master, you are too kind." Watson had become the Sword Saint's disciple. That young man, who was also Antonio's disciple, had become Reed's disciple. What was going on? The onlookers were shocked when they saw Watson bow to Reed. Chapter 378, Learning the Platinum Tier Fighting Techniques. "Hey, did you guys hear? Master Antonio's disciple became the Sword Saint's disciple last night. Hey, your news is outdated. I heard that that youth not only became the Sword Saint's disciple but also had a fight with the Sword Saint. I don't know if you guys saw the chaotic phenomenon in the sky last night, but it seemed like there was a huge sword-shaped country colliding with an illusory country hidden in the clouds. That momentum! I was drinking in front of the tavern and nearly wet my pants. That was a tavern on the main road of the royal city. A few drunkards in the tavern were bragging about what they saw last night. Just keep bragging. When the vision appeared in the sky last night, you were clearly lying on the ground, drunk as a skunk. How could you possibly know what happened outside? When the few drunkards were bragging excitedly, suddenly, a fat man walked forward with vigorous steps, holding a plate in front of them. He placed the red wine on the plate in front of everyone. Here, that is the red wine you asked for. It costs 10 gold coins per bottle. Statham, is the shop owner telling the truth? Were you drunk last night? Are you lying to us? Also, is the red wine made of gold, or is the tray made of gold? Why is the wine so expensive? 10 gold coins? Is that tavern robbing us? Some of his companions questioned the person who was bragging just now, and some stared at the red wine the boss brought over with puzzled expressions. The drunkard named Statham's face immediately flushed red, and he awkwardly changed the topic. Don't listen to the boss nonsense. I was drunk last night, but I woke up to pee. When I went to the toilet, I saw a strange phenomenon outside. Speaking of which, I got drunk yesterday because of that wine. I've drunk the wine from that shop before. It was so expensive, but the taste was mediocre. Today, I don't know why, but a batch of good wine must have arrived. The taste is not inferior to the 10-year-old wine from the F.A.T.C.A.T.S winery, and it's only 10 gold coins. Really? Let me have a taste. Oh my god, it's really delicious. The owner of the tavern walked to the counter. At that moment, several waiters bowed respectfully. Boss Donder. It was a bald man in luxurious clothes, and he looked like the owner of the tavern. He also had a flattering smile on his face. I wonder if Boss Donder is satisfied with the tavern's business. The man dressed up as the boss was the owner of the Three-Legged Cat Tavern, Donder. Just last night, Watson had unified the severed fingers across the royal city. Because of his contact with Watson, Donder had been the first to cooperate with him. After the meeting, Count Grey appointed him as the vice-commander. He was responsible for the transfer of goods between the various taverns, pricing, and management. At that moment, Donder came to one of the Severed Fingers Gang's tavern. The owner was originally just an ordinary member with the Severed Fingers Gang. As per Watson's new policy, that member did not commit murder and arson, his background was clean, so he replaced the original owner. Boss Donder, I have a question. Should I ask it? Go ahead. The red wine that Black Emperor made is not inferior to F.A.T.C.A.T.S Winery's 10-year-old red wine in terms of quality and texture. Normally, it is very normal for such wine to be sold for around 500 gold coins. Why did you only set a price of 10 gold coins? That is equivalent to selling it at the price of raw materials. Donder chuckled in response to the question. I wonder if you've heard of the concept of small profits but high sales? Even though selling goods at the price of 10 gold coins would cause a huge loss of profits, in the long run, that is a good thing. Previously, the goods we severed our fingers obtained through illegal channels. Furthermore, we used to have many substandard goods, which caused many people to be biased against our goods. Since the Black Emperor wants to turn severed fingers from an underground force into an above-ground force, it's necessary to improve his reputation. As long as we have a good reputation, we will have a steady stream of income. For example, our wine is the same as wine from the F.A.T.C.A.T.S winery. F.A.T.C.A.T.S winery sells for 500 gold coins, and we only sell it for 10 gold coins. Which side do you think the noblemen or even the civilian merchants will choose to buy from? As Donder spoke, he sat down on the chair at the counter, raised his legs, and placed them high on the counter. He tapped his round belly with his 5 fingers. Even if there are still people who suspect that the wine produced by the Severed Fingers Gang is mixed wine, it's hard to guarantee that they won't buy our wine when the price difference is 50 times. As long as those people try and know how good we are, we can slowly raise the price, and they'll be able to accept it. I'm tired of saying so much. Go, get me a bottle of 20-year-old fusion red wine. Usually, it's hard to find a bottle of that year's red wine even if you spend a lot of money. But now, we can drink that wine as we please. Yes, Boss Donder. After the waiter went to do his bidding, he quickly took the red wine, poured it into a crystal-like glass, and put a piece of ice in it. He picked up the glass and took a sip. Donder leaned comfortably on the chair and moaned. It had been many years since he had experienced such a comfortable feeling. There was no pain in his body, and he did not have to worry about drinking bad wine to death. He also had to send people to deal with it. It had to be said that doing business in the open was much better than doing it in secret. Black Emperor has given us all these things. In the beginning, he was full of fear toward Watson, but now there was only gratitude and joy in his heart. If not for Watson, he might not have known that he could make a huge profit without relying on illegal means. His life could be so wonderful. Putting down his glass, Donder looked around the tavern, which was several times fuller than usual. Boss, get me a glass of red wine. Boss, 2 more bottles of red wine. I want to bring them home. He could not help but smile. That was just the beginning. In the future, that place would only become better. He firmly believed in Watson's ability. After all, it was the first time he had become the disciple of both Antonio and the Sword Saint in the kingdom. After the meeting last night, even though many high-ranking officials of the Severed Fingers gang, who had committed crimes, were removed, the other regular members did not cooperate to help sell the blended wine and weapons. After all, Watson's plan to change the gang's structure was difficult for them. Those people were a little lost and could not see the future. It was not until a little later that they learned that Watson had become the Sword Saint's disciple. One might debate about the most respected person in the capital, Antonio or the king. However, everyone would agree that the Sword Saint was the strongest person there. There was no doubt about it. Watson's good fortune to become the disciples of those 2 people simultaneously meant that the Severed Fingers gang would have their support. That made the ordinary members of the Severed Fingers gang, who had been slacking off earlier, feel like they were on steroids. With the help of those 2 important figures, it seemed like they could do any trade they desired. Speaking of which, Black Emperor is truly outstanding. Not only does he have outstanding talent in terms of strength, but his intelligence also far surpasses that of an ordinary adult. It's hard to imagine that he's a 12 or 13-year-old child. It seems that there really is a genius in that world. In the past, Donder did not believe in geniuses. He felt that the difference between people was only due to their learning and hard work. The fact that a person with a crippled leg could become the boss of a 3-legged cat pub was the best proof, but he had changed his mind. According to the intelligence from my subordinates, the other leaders outside the capital have received the news of our internal shuffle and are on their way back. They are expected to arrive by tomorrow at the latest. I heard that there are a few troublemakers among those leaders. I wonder how Black Emperor will convince those guys by then? However, he is Black Emperor, after all. He must have prepared a complete countermeasure. Watson, raise your hand when you swing your sword. Only when the space for your muscles to move is large enough can the power of your swordsmanship be unleashed. At the same time, your heart should move along with the sword. Your heart should follow the sword, but your eyes should not move along with the sword. That will only let your enemies see through your thoughts in advance. Do you understand? Yes, Master. I understand. Watson was in the Sword Saint's courtyard. He was on an empty training ground made of rocks. He was wearing a training suit and holding a wooden sword. Under Reed's guidance, he swung the sword violently. Drops of sweat slid down Watson's forehead. Samuel and 8 people in training suits, whom he had met the previous day, stood near him. 2 of them were the men who had fought with Watson. Sword Saint Reed had 8 disciples, and Watson was the 9th. At that moment, Other than Watson, the others were all waving their wooden swords in unison. Their eyes were filled with envy and hatred as they looked at Watson. When Master taught us, he always told us to practice on our own. None of that one-on-one tutoring. Furthermore, Master's tone when teaching Watson was also different from when he spoke to us. It was too gentle. Someone could not help but ridicule the situation. Don't you know that Watson is Master Antonio's disciple? How could Master not give him the due respect? Oh, so he has a connection. What connection? If you don't know anything about that, then don't talk nonsense. That young man came here last night. At that time, eldest senior brother, second senior brother, and third senior brother performed platinum tier fighting techniques together, but they were not a match for that young man. In the end, Master was the one who defeated him. Master said that that young man is a diamond tier elite. Is that true? Of course, it's true. I saw it when I was hiding in my room yesterday. By the way, you guys did not know about the big commotion last night. It's not like you don't know how strict Master is. He swings his wooden sword at least 100,000 times a day. It took me at least 20 hours to finish that and other training. I'm so tired every day that I definitely can't get up, let alone fight. We probably won't even wake up from an earthquake. However, it's a pity to miss a diamond tier battle because of that. If there's such an opportunity again, you must wake me up. Training time. No small talk. All of you are here to train. The disciples were about to continue chatting when Samuel, who was at the head of the group, suddenly turned his head and glared at them fiercely. That caused those people to keep quiet out of fear. Samuel looked back with a complicated expression. The news of the three of them losing to Watson last night had spread in the Sword Saint courtyard, causing him to lose his dignity, which he was trying his best to regain in front of Watson. In his opinion, it was not impossible. Watson was very strong, but that was in the field of magic. In terms of swordsmanship, Watson could not be too strong since he wanted to acknowledge Reed as his teacher. If he suppressed his strength before Watson learned too much, he might have a chance to win in a simple sword fight. Samuel could not help but look in Watson's direction. He saw Watson displaying a platinum tier sword technique to Reed. Platinum tier sword technique, light and darkness reincarnation sword. Master, may I ask if I performed that move correctly? A big question mark appeared above Samuel's head. Watson had only learned the basic heart follows the sword and the eye and the sword techniques from Reed. When did Watson start performing platinum tier techniques? Did he miss anything when he was daydreaming? Chapter 379, The Sword of Eternal Reincarnation. Earlier, on the other side of the training field, Samuel's junior brothers were discussing animatedly while Watson focused on learning the sword technique that Reed had taught him. The heart follows the sword, and the eye and the sword are two different techniques. That move requires 3 uses at once. It sounds very difficult, but it's nothing much. After all, I have knowledge from the Ain-Herjar's body and the system fusion. The Ain-Herjar body contained a large amount of information about warriors and swordsmanship. That allowed Watson's understanding of swordsmanship to be no weaker than that of an ordinary platinum tier swordsman. With the system fusion, he could memorize and refine any knowledge that he did not understand. At that moment, Sword Saint Reed had taught him the basics of swordsmanship. Even though that swordsmanship was very basic, Watson judged that it should be at gold tier based on the large amount of experience in the Ain-Herjar's body. After Reed had taught him the corresponding knowledge, he immediately integrated it into his mind and raised it to peak gold tier. Peak gold tier fighting technique, Heart Sword. Ability: without the cooperation of the 5 senses, the blade will move according to the mind to break the speed limit. Usually, when a person wanted to strike, he would first use his eyes to determine the enemy's position, listen to the calibration of his ears, and then control his arm to raise it. However, at that moment, Watson did not use the fused ability. He did not need to use his 5 senses to lock onto the enemy. Instead, he used his mind to determine the opponent's position. He did not need to raise his arm either. His mind could control the blade of the sword to move it. The speed of his sword was more than 10 times faster. Heart Sword, activate. When the fused fighting technique was activated, the wooden sword in Watson's hand began to fly spontaneously. It drew a mysterious trajectory and surrounded Watson's body. Since his hands were freed, Watson could use them elsewhere. He covered his mouth as he yawned. "Master, what do you think of the basic swordsmanship that I displayed?" "It's not bad." Although his words were calm, Reed was stunned. He had a feeling that Watson would learn his techniques quickly anyway. After all, it was not difficult, but he did not expect him to be that fast. Furthermore, Watson seemed to have improved it. He did not teach Watson how to control the swords without using his hands. "Is that kid deliberately challenging me?" Antonio told me that Watson had a special talent. He could learn anything at once, and he could even master it and raise it to a higher level. He wanted me to try my best to teach some difficult techniques. I admit that Watson learns things very quickly, but it is too exaggerated for him to learn everything immediately. I think Antonio is afraid of losing my respect, so he deliberately made up such an excuse. Reed decided to verify if what Antonio said was true. "Watson, your basic swordsmanship is not bad. It seems like you don't have a foundation in swordsmanship. It's a waste of time to continue teaching you the basics. I'm going to teach you a platinum tier fighting technique that I learned when I was young. Its name is Light and Darkness Reincarnation Sword. If you can learn it within an hour, I'll teach you the next move. If you can't, you have to agree to one condition." "What condition?" "Give up on practicing magic and other professions and devote yourself to the art of the sword." Reed's eyes were burning as he voiced out his thoughts. He knew Antonio wanted Watson to learn magic and swordsmanship at the same time and become an all-rounded talent. However, Reed thought it was a joke. A person's energy was limited. That was the same for a genius. Even though he was a genius, he did not dare to waste his energy on anything other than swordsmanship. That was the way to reach the peak. Previously, he did not tell Watson that because he felt that the boy was essentially Antonio's disciple. However, he was genuinely moved by Watson's talent. It was a sin to let a person with such talent waste his life. A person's life is limited. "Watson, you have to understand that training 4 different professions at the same time will only enrich your abilities, but it will not increase your strength. If you give up training in other professions, I want to save 3 times the energy to allow you to advance to the Starlight tier or even a stronger tier. What do you think?" "Master, I understand what you mean. I can agree to your request, but what if I can learn the sword technique you taught me in an hour?" "Then just pretend that I did not say that." He thought that Watson would not be able to learn the technique in an hour. If he could, then it did not seem like it would take much energy to train in all 4 classes simultaneously. "Observe. This time, I won't use words to teach you. Instead, I'll show you the technique once. You have to watch carefully and learn it well. Later, if there's anything you don't understand, just ask." As Reed spoke, he stretched his right hand outward. 2 swords appeared in his hand. One was black, and the other was white. The 2 blades intertwined in a strange posture. The front of it was connected and twisted into a peculiar shape that looked like an Ouroboros. The head that emitted white light and the pitch-black tail seemed to touch but would never be able to do that. When the 2 blades intertwined, they disappeared from Reed's palm. A clear boundary between black and white replaced them. Reed's left palm was black, while his right palm was white. Watson exclaimed in his heart. Memories from Reed's youth were also contained in the World Transformation Mirror. He had the memory of that move. He knew that that move was a platinum tier fighting technique. When unleashed, it could turn half the sky into day and render the other half night. When Reed's hand unleashed a platinum tier fighting technique, it was so gentle and did not feel the slightest bit of power. That control was more profound than the water soldiers that Watson had trained in the floating city. Do you understand? While Watson was thinking about all sorts of things, Reed retracted his palm. Yes, Master, I've already learned it. You've learned it? Then show me. Reed did not believe Watson's words. He did not know what Watson meant by learned. Even if he had imitated it, it would not be considered learning if he did not display it. Then I won't stand on ceremony. Platinum tier fighting technique, light and darkness reincarnation sword. Watson immediately released the move in the Ainherjar body's memory. The entire training field was centered around him. Half of it turned into night and the other half into day. That scene attracted the attention of Samuel and the others who were discussing it in the distance. The time had arrived. Light and dark reincarnation sword isn't that Master's most powerful move when he was young? How could Watson have learned it in such a short time? Samuel was puzzled, his face was filled with disbelief. It was not only him, but the junior brothers beside him were also quite surprised. Master's move requires a person to use both light and darkness elemental combat auras. Could Watson fulfill that condition? Idiot! Watson must have fulfilled that condition. Otherwise, how could he have used it? I can't believe that other than our master, there are also people who possess the talent for light and darkness combat aura. They envied and hated Watson. Reed, who was in charge of teaching Watson, was also at a loss. Antonio had been truthful with him. The light and darkness reincarnation sword was one of his proudest moves. Even if it was only in the diamond tier, it was still pretty good. He did not expect Watson to learn it in less than an hour. His speed of learning had greatly exceeded his expectations. Master, why aren't you speaking? Are you not satisfied with my light and darkness reincarnation sword technique? If you are satisfied, do I still need to give up my other training? Watson scratched his head and asked. Taking a deep breath, Reed said, Watson, let me ask you, have you ever encountered a similar move before? How should I put it? When I cleared the underground maze, the World Transformation Mirror acknowledged me as its master. I absorbed all the memories in the World Transformation Mirror, which also contained your memories, so I have mastered that move. I see. Reed did not feel disappointed when he heard that. Instead, he heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that no one in the world could learn a platinum tier fighting technique in a second. It was all thanks to the memories in Watson's body. Perhaps I'll teach you another sword technique next. It's also a platinum tier technique. Its name is Infinite Sword Slash. Reed developed that move after he left the underground maze city. Its power was even greater than the light and darkness reincarnation sword technique. Furthermore, it did not require him to master both light and dark combat auras simultaneously. That was because it was not developed when he was young. Therefore, it was impossible for Watson to have mastered it. Watch, I will only demonstrate the technique once. Reed made a movement with his hand, and a light sword appeared in front of Watson. Then, the light sword rose into the air and turned into thousands of blades that were raining down on them. Every light sword was like a toothpick. If it was magnified countless times, it was like an actual infinite slash. Watson had seen Christina perform that technique before, and it was different. Reed wanted to teach him, so the trajectory of each lightsaber was very slow, and during the process, the lightsaber was accompanied by a layer of clear and visible rules. Absolute combo, any swordsmanship containing this rule will continue to attack. It will not stop unless the enemy is dead or exhausted. The core rules of the entire sword technique appeared in Watson's mind. He instantly comprehended most of it. Then, he used the fusion system on the Infinite Sword Slash and the Light and Darkness Reincarnation Sword techniques that he had just learned. Congratulations on the successful fusion, Master. You have obtained a peak platinum tier sword technique, the Sword of Eternal Reincarnation. Watson, have you learned it? If you can't do it, don't force yourself. Reed stared at Watson, Pretending to be indifferent as he asked, "If you haven't learned it, I can demonstrate it to you again." "No need, Master, I've already learned it." Watson raised his wooden sword and released the peak platinum tier sword technique that he had just fused. Sword of Eternal Reincarnation. The space around Watson was cut apart by something black and white. Clusters of black and white vortexes appeared. Black and white blades in the shape of the number 8 also emerged from the vortexes. It was as if they were going to pierce the world. Chapter 380, Duplicating the Divine Kingdom of the Sword. Peak Platinum Tier Sword Technique, the Eternal Sword of Reincarnation. Effects: summons a large number of light and darkness reincarnation swords to unleash a large-scale attack. The attack will not stop before killing the enemy. After the fusion, specific information regarding the sword technique surfaced in Watson's mind. Amidst the black and white vortexes, the light and darkness reincarnation swords unsheathed and revolved around him. It had turned into a sword aura storm. The space enveloped by the sword aura turned from day to night. It rotated non-stop. The crowd was stunned when they saw that. What kind of sword technique is that? It doesn't seem to be the infinite sword slash that Master had demonstrated. Instead, it looks a bit like the light and darkness reincarnation sword. Maybe Watson didn't learn Master's sword technique and used another sword technique instead. Some of the trainees muttered to themselves in puzzlement. They had seen that the sword technique that Reed had taught Watson was the infinite sword slash. That was Reed's signature skill, and many of the disciples present knew it. Furthermore, they had also seen Reed asking whether Watson had learned it or not. If he could not learn it, then he would demonstrate it again. Since Watson didn't release the infinite sword slash, it means that he did not learn it. If he didn't learn it, then why did he say that he had learned it? That is not right. Master hates liars. It seems that Watson is going to be scolded by Master. Eldest senior brother, what do you think? One of the disciples asked Samuel arrogantly. Samuel looked hesitant. He had the same thought. He wanted to see Reed scold Watson so that Christina would know that Watson was not that outstanding, but he felt that something was wrong. Watson, may I ask the name of the move you used? It doesn't seem like the move I just taught you. Reed did not hear the words of his disciples in the distance and asked with a straight face. Watson thought that he was dissatisfied with his unauthorized fusion of the sword techniques. He scratched his head and revealed an awkward expression. I'm sorry, Master. That move is called the Sword of Eternal Reincarnation. It isn't really the move that you taught me because I fused the two sword techniques. Master, did I make you unhappy, or is there a flaw in the sword technique that I fused without permission? He had fused the sword techniques that his master had taught him. No wonder it looked completely different from the infinite sword slash. No one knew if that was the truth. All the disciples there had that thought in their minds. They heard Reed's side. Watson, you really are a natural talent in swordsmanship. Antonio told me that you could learn everything simultaneously and fuse them into something stronger. I did not believe it at first, but now it seems that I'm ignorant. Looking at you now, I want you to specialize in swordsmanship even more. That bet doesn't count. Let's make another bet. I will teach you everything I've learned in my life. If you can learn all of that, I will allow you to continue with your other training. If you can't, then you will have to learn swordsmanship from me. How about that? Master, please enlighten me. Watson's words caused the expressions of everyone there to change. One of the Sword Saint's disciples muttered to himself, so, Watson was not lying about fusing the sword techniques. It was true. Can such a thing be done? Even learning a platinum tier sword technique was a difficult thing for them, let alone fusing two techniques. Reed took them as disciples because they had outstanding talents. However, learning a platinum tier sword technique would take them a few months to a few years. Samuel's expression was the ugliest. He initially thought that Watson would make a fool of himself in front of Reed, but in the end, Watson's talent was too shocking. Watson was the first person to wiggle out of a bet with Reed. Just as everyone was harboring evil thoughts about that, Reed and Watson began a new round of training. The next move is a diamond tier sword technique that surpasses the infinite sword slash. It's called the Water Moon Divine Dance. Reed stretched his right hand outward and flew into the air. He sent several dazzling sword auras toward the ground with his bare hands. Since his movements were too fast, layers of illusions appeared on Reed's body as if he had countless clones. When the sword auras condensed, they turned from a gaseous state into a liquid form, which then turned into a long sky blue river. That long river was no different from an actual river. However, what formed the river was not water molecules but sword aura molecules. The ground was cut into pieces like tofu, and the air was pierced through wherever the long river passed. The next one is a diamond tier sword technique, sword aura typhoon. A long river, formed by sword auras, disappeared as a dark cloud appeared in the sky. That dark cloud was also formed by sword auras, and a strong wind that did not disperse blew right under it. It carried the wind elements that had been extracted from every point in the air. The bright and clear sky instantly darkened, even the sunlight was blocked. Darkness covered half of the royal city. Reed was like the ruler of the world as he stood in the center. He can easily change the rules of the world with just one move. That is the power of a sword saint. Watson's eyes shone. He could feel that the sword aura typhoon released by Reed changed the weather, and the rules in the air were also distorted. All the rules that had nothing to do with the wind attribute and the way of the sword were eliminated entirely, leaving only useful rules. Watson had a feeling that the power of the sword and the wind elements would increase by several times in that kind of environment, and that was just Reed's casual sword attack. If he were to be serious, Reed's sword aura would stack and gradually eliminate the surrounding rules that had nothing to do with the sword. Reed would become stronger, and his opponent would become weaker. Then, Reed retracted the sword aura typhoon and descended from the sky. He said, "Watson, can you learn those two moves?" Reed's eyes flickered. If Watson could learn multiple platinum tier sword techniques in one go, then what about diamond tier sword techniques? Could he also learn them? "I'll try my best, Master." Watson began to fuse the two sword techniques he had just learned in his mind. "Congratulations, Master, for successfully fusing two diamond tier sword techniques. You have obtained the peak diamond tier sword technique, Myriad Lightning Fall." Following the fusion of knowledge, Watson subconsciously raised his right hand. The dark clouds that had disappeared gathered again. It was even denser than before. Streaks of silvery white lightning flashed through the clouds, and a slightly slender lightning bolt struck the sword saint's courtyard. It blasted a deep pit about 100 meters into the ground. The gravel in the deep hole was crushed into dust before it could even rise. Those bolts of lightning were not real lightning but condensed sword aura in the shape of lightning. The Water Moon Divine Dance was a water elemental skill, while the sword aura typhoon was one with wind elements. The combination of the two elements created the lightning's rule. The power of a lightning strike was greater than 1,000 tons. At that moment, the sound of thunderstorms exploded in the entire capital. Only the glittering silver snakes could be seen in the pitch-black night sky, as if it was the end of the world. "That's good." Reed did not even need to ask about that. He already knew that Watson had mastered his techniques. He immediately released different diamond tier skills. Diamond tier sword technique, Starfall Sunset. Diamond tier sword technique, Unfettered Supreme Sword. Peak diamond tier sword technique, Space Piercing Slash. Numerous sword techniques with rules descended from the sky and landed in front of Watson. Within a short period, Reed had released dozens of techniques. Watson activated the fusion system, allowing that vast knowledge to collide and refine in his mind. "Congratulations, Master, for integrating dozens of diamond tier sword techniques. You have obtained a Starlight tier sword technique, Kingdom of the Sword." Starlight tier sword technique, Kingdom of the Sword. Ability: you can temporarily create a Kingdom of the Sword, covering an area as far as the eye can see. During that period, you can exclude any rules in the kingdom that have nothing to do with the sword. The power of the sword technique released will be increased by 10 times. Anything other than sword elemental kills can't be released. Additional abilities: Return of the 10,000 swords, deliver the judgment of the divine kingdom to the enemy, expending all of your abilities to cause starlight tear damage, which can cause damage to divinity, ruler of the sword. You will own all sword elemental weapons within the divine kingdom, and at the same time, you will be immune to all damages from a sword attack. After the information appeared in his mind, Watson extended his right hand outward. An illusory, giant sword-shaped kingdom suddenly appeared above the entire courtyard. That realm was enveloped in a large amount of power of faith. It would not matter if one were a platinum tier elite or an ordinary person, they would tremble when they saw that kingdom. That giant sword-shaped kingdom was almost exactly the same as the kingdom that Reed had released previously. Plop! No one knew who was the first person to kneel on the ground. Following that, Reed's disciples, including Samuel, all knelt and looked up at the kingdom of God above their heads. Excellent! I remember that the kingdom of the sword is one of Master's strongest sword techniques. Watson had actually learned it. How is that learning? That is stealing other people's abilities onto himself. One of the disciples' lips trembled as he sighed. Many disciples had similar thoughts. Even the light in Samuel's eyes dimmed. After seeing Watson's powerful strength and outstanding talent, he did not give up on competing with Watson. However, Watson's rapid learning of platinum-tier swordsmanship had already dealt a blow to him. One could almost say it was a fatal blow. His self-esteem had been completely destroyed. No matter how brave he was, he could not compare to Watson at that moment. That Watson was not a human but a monster. After releasing the kingdom of the sword, Watson felt that the commotion was a little big. He immediately withdrew his sword technique and looked at Reed. Master, I've learned all the sword techniques you taught me. What should we learn next? Well, we won't learn more for now. Since you've learned so much, you should be tired. Let's take a break first. Reed's lips twitched when he heard Watson's question. It's okay, Master. I'm not very tired yet. I think that I can still continue with the training. Well, I'm tired, Reed shouted inwardly. That was too weird. In just a short while, the young man had already learned the kingdom of the sword. If he were to continue teaching Watson, then the boy could become the next sword saint. Everyone, go and rest. I'll give you a day off. I'll inform you about the training time tomorrow. Reed pretended not to see Watson's burning gaze and left the training ground as if he was flying. He felt that he should have a good chat with Antonio.